And what I'll do is post the link on the courses page. Give me a couple days, but that way, if you miss something, you can always go back. We always have it for history. So thank you very much for being here today. We are going to talk about some special funding opportunities with capital campaigns and with endowment campaigns. So let me pull up slides. There we go.
It has that little,
Oh, does it? Okay.
yeah, the recorded box in there.
Got it. Okay. Let me. Thank you.
Say I've learned from Ken's classes that they're always like, you
You
guys can't see that.
Yeah,
on that
yeah,
one.
it's different. So
Yeah.
thank you for telling. All right, that looks good.
Yep.
Perfect. So before we jump in, let's start with introductions. I think most of you know who I am. I now realized I have 36 years of nonprofit experience, but we're going to keep it at 35. I started by writing grants, University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, Bridgewater College. We were in Virginia for 5 years. And then at St. Ambrose before opening the company. Company's almost 12 years old, founded in 2011. We do, in addition to fundraising, planning, and consulting, which is what we're going to talk about today. We also do grant development work. We do strategic planning, facilitation, leadership, and board development as well. Certified fundraising executive, and I earned my doctorate in higher ed administration. And my focus was on fund development. So I did a lot of research on why alumni give or don't give to their alma mater, and some of that helps to inform some of what we're going to talk about today. When I was at St. Ambrose, I also helped to manage their 10-year, $80 million campaign that was both for endowment and for capital. And I've since worked with a number of organizations on their capital campaigns as well. So we'll draw from some of that experience today as well. So I want to know who you are and for you to get to know each other as well, since we're such a small and mighty group. Your name, where you work, but also what brings you here today and what do you want to learn? Are you really interested in the capital piece and the endowment piece? Well, we're going to talk about them separately. There's a lot of overlap between them. So Zubair, you want to start?
Hi guys, my name is Zubair Ansari. I work at the Cancer Support Community in Washington, D.C. We're the world's largest cancer support organization. We have 190 locations across the United States, Canada, and Europe. And I think we have one in the Middle East. And I serve as the executive director for CSC in DC. And what brings you here today? Well, I joined them about 6 months ago. And prior to that, I worked for multiple hospital organizations in the Midwest, on the East Coast, and in Saudi Arabia and in Dubai. So I've learned over the years that any type of endowment or anything donor drive requires, strategic planning. And so the reason I'm in this course is I'm not an expert in fundraising, but I want to learn more so that our development team can be successful.
Okay, wonderful. Are you planning either a capital or endowment campaign anytime soon, or is this more for background information?
No, that's a good question. So I think within the next year, I'll be having like a annual appeal and campaign. So it'll hit the ground running probably in the next 6 months.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Lori.
I am the executive director of an art center in Fort Madison, Iowa. And we now own our own building. It's a pretty small facility, but we do mighty things for our little community. And I took over as that, in that position 2 years ago, and I do believe we need to have an endowment fund to stabilize our operational dollars every year. And so we launched one in May, and we earned $1,100 our first day. I have to note that Fort Madison is in Lee County, Iowa, and it's one of the poorest in the state of Iowa. So this is going to be a heavy lift, but I do believe it's possible. We have a lot of big donors in the area, people who really do support the community, and quite a few corporate entities that I believe will see the value in stabilizing our little institution. So I'm here to learn how to do a better job. I see this as probably a 6-year time horizon to get the money that we need to have in our fund. And I just want to do a better job as we go forward.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for being here today. Selena.
So my name is Selena. I work at the Humane Society of Scott County. And I'm here today because we're in a very pivotal spot in our organization where there's a lot of different things that we could move forward with in the future. And I think a capital campaign is something that no matter what happens, I think that's something that needs to happen sometime in the near future. So that's probably what I hope to learn the most about. I think in the very long-term future, like an endowment campaign would be something, but I think a capital campaign would come first for us.
Okay, all right, perfect. All right.
Agreed. My name is Erica. I also work at the Humane Society of Scott County. I am here today because although I've worked in animal welfare for 10 years, I am super new to the nonprofit world. I worked for a municipal, totally government-ran shelter prior to this, so everything is new to me. So I'm hoping to learn all of the things. But like Selena said, a capital campaign is definitely, I think, on the horizon for us within the next 12 to 18 months, depending on how everything goes in the next 6 months.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you for being here today. This is informal. So, as we're going through this, if you've got questions, if you've got comments, please, jump in. Anyone, Zubair and Lori, sometimes I don't see you guys on the screen. If you're being subtle about wanting to jump in, so just jump in. Or, one of these I can usually see as well. So our agenda today is actually very simple. We're going to start by talking about capital campaigns. What are they? Why do you need them? How do you run one? How do you execute them? And actually, a lot of what we learn in capital campaigns is going to apply to endowment campaigns. So, second thing we're going to talk about are endowment campaigns. What are they? When do you need one? How do you plan one? How do you execute them? And really, we're going to spend some time in the second half when we're talking about endowment campaigns, talking about how are they different from capital campaigns. And as we're talking about the capital campaign, I'll also try and talk about, and this applies to the endowment campaigns as well. So let's jump in and talk about capital campaigns to begin with. When we talk about a capital campaign, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I want to start with some definitions. I had a phone call with somebody who's like, yeah, we need help with a capital campaign. And as he talked through it, I'm like, that's not a capital campaign, dude. And I'm like, that's an annual fund campaign that you're looking for, or it may have been some of an endowment campaign. So, and in some ways it doesn't matter. It's more semantical, but I want to make sure we're talking about the same kind of thing. It's really what a campaign is a marketing strategy where you group together similar projects under one umbrella. And what you're doing with that is you're using it to create urgency and importance for your donor. So the key words there are, it's a marketing strategy. So you could have any kind of campaign. You could have a campaign to, raise your annual giving. And often we talk about an annual giving campaign. Endowments are certainly part of a campaign. Capital is as well. You can also do a comprehensive campaign. The campaign I mentioned that I helped with at St. Ambrose, that 80 million was a comprehensive campaign because it had capital, it had endowment, and it had annual fund all wrapped in it. The reality is our annual fund didn't look much different during that decade. It was just, as long as we're raising money, let's give donors an opportunity to give to any one of these 3 buckets, and we'll still count it so that it, as part of our marketing messaging, we can say you gave to the campaign. The other thing that's important about that, I have donors or clients who will really get hung up on their goal. It'll be like, I was working with one client and we were getting ready to announce the campaign, and we were huddled in their office beforehand with the press out there. How much are we going to announce our goal is? And I said, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. And what I mean by that is nobody's going to remember your goal, right? And especially the last 2 years, right? Costs have gone, like, and so what started here as a real reasonable goal quickly became here. We're hoping it'll go back to here, right? And so if you announced it's a $5 million goal and you couldn't raise that, and all of a sudden you ended up building at 4 million, it's not like you missed goal. It was, hooray, we made our $4 million goal, right? So when I talk about it being a marketing strategy, that's why it's really important. Our Ambrose campaign was a $100 million campaign. We got to 80. And we celebrated that we got to 80. We didn't talk about, we didn't make 100, right? So that's the important piece. When we're talking about capital campaigns, these tend to be large one-time projects. So tends to be construction. So if you're building a new humane society, that would be a capital campaign. If you're going to renovate your current building, that would be a capital campaign. It could also be for a large purchase. I was talking to a client last week who needs a new HVAC system. We were talking about grants. They're a grant client. And I'm like, and so they're like, what grants are out there for an HVAC system? And I go, well, if we put in HVAC system, we're not going to find anything, but all these that we found could pay for it. So in the course of the conversation, I said, how much are you looking for? And they go, oh, we think it's 3 million. It's a very large building. And then they said, and we need, it's an arts organization, so they need seats and they need to redo the bathroom. And I said, do you ever think about a capital campaign? And they go, yeah, but not the HVAC. That's boring. We thought about it for the seats in the bathroom, and I'm not sure why bathrooms are less boring than HVAC. And so, what I mentioned to them was, and I think their total is like 8 million. I said, bundle it together. It's $8 million to renovate, rejuvenate, update, whatever the appropriate verb is, the theater. If you invest $8 million, you can assure that this wonderful organization can continue to provide all the wonderful programming to the community. That's your pitch. It's not buy us an HVAC, right? And then you go, ooh, yeah, how do you do that? Well, we need a new HVAC and we need new seats and we need new bathrooms and so you're getting people to give to the whole, which I think is going to be much easier, air quotes. We always use air quotes talking about ease of fundraising, than finding 6 million in grants to buy a new HVAC or raising it any other way. So it becomes a way to kind of think about and talk about your projects as a whole. And sometimes that's easy, right? We need a new shelter. That's easy, right? But sometimes we group other things together that are large purchases as well. Why would you want to conduct a capital campaign? First thing is it provides a coherent story that you can tell your donors. As I said, it's marketing. So how can we talk about what we're doing in a way that will get them excited? Same thing's true about an endowment campaign, right? It's how can we tell this story in a way that will get donors excited? And you're going to do that whether you have an umbrella of a campaign or it's, I'm going to say just, a single appeal, etc. But what the campaign framework does that's different is it really focuses your resources and your donors on your priority area. This is our priority for the next 2 years, 3 years, whatever your time horizon is. We need to build a new shelter. We need to grow our endowment. And by focusing your internal resources, your development team, whether that's multiple people or parts of you, it really knows what it is that you're doing. More importantly, it really focuses your donors. They know what's important. They know what you need, and it can focus your messaging. One of the challenges I see with a lot of funding campaigns broadly, organizations need so much that they end up peppering, right? It's like, today we need cats, tomorrow we need dogs, today we need this kind of support, tomorrow we need this one. And it confuses your donors, because as much as you want to think they're focusing all their attention on you, they're not. They're giving you this much attention. And research tells us you need to hear a message 7 times for it to resonate. So if you keep hearing different messages, they're not going to resonate. And as a staff, you're going, I'm tired of talking about this. And when you're tired of talking about it, that's probably when you're about halfway done because your audience isn't listening. So you're really focused on this as a way to get the message out and a way to help your donors really understand what it is that you do. Which is another reason why it can be very helpful to use a campaign umbrella, even for your annual fund. And to say, what are we raising money for this year? Rather than, oh crap, we got an appeal going out next week. What are we gonna write it? Right? Which never happens. It's sitting down at the beginning of the year and saying, this year we're focused on X. At Ambrose, we would say, okay, this year our focus is scholarships. This year our focus is on, academics. This year our focus is on whatever else it would be on. And then again, all your messages all year long can be on that. And if whatever it is you're raising money for is already in your budget, it doesn't matter what you raise the money for. I mean, it does. But if you're going to spend, Humane Society is easy, right? If you need dog food, you need cat food, you need vet, you need staff to care for the animals, you need a whole lot more, right? If you had a campaign for the year that said, this is our dog food year, we need money for dog food. And no matter how much you raised for that, you're going to spend that money anyway. So you use the donated money and what you had in your budget, you use for cat food and vet care and staff, etc. So as long as you look at what your budget is and your biggest needs, then that should work out. Because what it's doing is focusing your resources and your donors on your priority. Okay. Does that make sense? The other thing the campaign umbrella does is it starts to, for your donor, this is not true for the annual fund campaign, but the capital campaign or the endowment campaign starts to differentiate your one-time needs from your ongoing needs. So your annual donors know that when they give you, $100, $1,000 to run your arts programming this year, guess what? That money's going to come in, you're going to spend it, you're going to need another $1,000 next year, right? So your longtime donors, at least in their head, are budgeting, what can I give you every year? When it's a capital project, they know you're not coming back next year, right? This is a one-time expense. And yeah, okay, you might need to renovate in 10, 20, 50 years, but it's for all intents and purposes a one-time expense. So I can budget differently. Can I give you $10,000 a year? Maybe not, but could I adjust and find a way to give you 10,000 once? Maybe. So it kind of changes that perception, that dynamic on the part of the donor. That's even more true with an endowment campaign. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit, but in endowment campaigns, often these are ultimate gifts for someone. Often they're out of their estate. And so how can you talk to them about why you are worth supporting in perpetuity by giving them part of your estate? And obviously you don't get that every year, you get that once. It also, capital campaigns tend to increase donors giving because they know this. And there are, especially like corporations and foundations are usually much more intentional about this. There's a foundation that I talked to and they're like, what's your goal? We give up to 10%. So if you're building a $100,000 building, 10,000 is going to be your top gift. If you're building $1 million building, you might get 100,000. Now, that's not formulaic, that's not definitive, but because donors, especially some of those large institutional donors, tend to base their gift on the size of the campaign, back to my theater client, right? If they need 6 million for their HVAC, and let's just assume it's $1 million for the bathroom and $1 million for the seats. If they go, hey, we need $1 million for the seats, that's up to 100,000. If they went to that donor and said, we've got an $8 million campaign, they might get 800,000. It's not quite that exact, but the donors do tend to think that way. And so by putting it under the umbrella of a capital campaign, you can actually raise more money. You can also often attract new donors. And so when I work with clients on their capital campaigns, one of the things we work on is not just let's raise the money for the campaign, but how can you start to seed your future? And so of the new donors that are coming to you, how are you going to steward them? How are you going to keep them engaged? How are you going to keep them informed? And, I always get the question, they just gave to the capital campaign. Do I ask them for an annual fund gift? And the answer is always yes. They love you right now. Ask them for a gift. Don't wait for someone else to come and them to get to know someone else and love someone else, right? Keep them engaged, keep them involved. To become an annual donor. Questions, comments? Does that make sense? All right. So when I think about capital campaigns, or I talk to clients about capital campaigns, I always say, this is your annual fundraising on steroids, because it's a little more intense. There's usually more zeros, which makes it a little bit scarier, but the process is very similar. And while we should be doing really good planning of our annual campaigns, that doesn't always happen, and usually you can get away with it. On a capital campaign or an endowment campaign, you've got to do your homework up front. You've got to plan it. So what do I mean by that? The first thing you need to know is your projects. And that sounds really obvious, but you would be surprised. I'll talk to, a potential client about, oh, we need a capital campaign. All right, what are you raising money for? Well, we don't know yet. Well, that's pretty hard to raise money for, we don't know yet. How much is it going to cost? Well, we don't know yet. Really hard to build a we don't know yet campaign with a dollar amount. Part of the challenge, and I get this, is it's a chicken and the egg problem, is how much do we have to build our building? Right? We don't have money to go hire the architect to tell us what we need and how we're going to build our building. But you do need some idea, right? Your building is X number of square feet right now. It's too small. So what would it cost to double it, right? And how much is it per square foot? you know, your building's pretty much a
It's a
box. There's not a whole lot of
It's
special.
the old
ed.
warehouse, yeah.
So if you were to ask an architect friend, by the way, if you're planning a capital campaign, get architect friends on your board. Get construction people, get architects, get real estate people. Think about what you want, what expertise do you want, get them on your board. And not like, we're launching a campaign tomorrow. Hey, construction people join
Yeah,
our board.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Get them on now.
yeah.
Because
It's a
because
good time to right now too.
Yep.
'Cause we're already doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
Because then you can reach out to them and say, hey, if we were to double this building and build new, round number, what does it cost square feet? And often that's enough. The more advanced your planning, the better your success. Because that round number, they don't know you need a special HVAC system. They don't know you need a special ABCD, right? And it's once you really dig in that your round number of 3 million might become 4, might become 2.8, might be, you know, but at least have that early conversation to get that round number. And to hone in on what do you want? And that's a board discussion. So, you know, even before you test it, you have to have something to test. And that is having that general idea. The next thing you need is your case for support. And your case for support are the reasons why we should support this project. I like to create 2 cases for support. The internal case for support is an internal document. It's words, it's long, it's repetitive. It has every possible reason why anybody would want to support your project. And what it does is it allows you to think through all of that at the front end. So that once you have that done, in theory, you never have to write another word. You're pulling from your case. So I'm going to a business, here's the business case for why we need it. I'm going to an individual, you know, who's been touched by cancer, here's how it helps the cancer community. I'm going to a medical professional, here's how it helps the medical professional. And you're pulling all of these pieces out. You also want a case for support for an endowment campaign. And I think it's worth the time to create a case for support for your annual fund campaign. To think through what are all the reasons why you support this organization. And it starts with what's the problem? And often we skip, I always tell people you're starting in the middle of the story. Tell me why. Why should we care about, you know, the animals in our community? Why are the arts important? Why do we need additional support if we have cancer? Cancer is not a problem. Boy, this is hard to say. You know, I go to the doctor, I get my support, right? I suck it up. I don't need any extra support. And so you've got to start there. And I think the reason a lot of organizations don't is if I said, why do we need to care for our animals? Or, you know, any of these questions, you're going to look at me like, what planet are you from? Of course we do. But when you're forced to sit down and articulate it, it's harder than you think. And so this forces you to sit down and articulate it, which also makes it easier for you to sit down and talk to donors because you've thought it through. And I'm one of these people, I think by writing. And so I can find the gaps in my knowledge or the gaps in my logic when I sit down to write it. And why I'm a writer. Once you have that case for support, and that could be 10, 15, 20 pages. Oh, I'm sorry. I started with, it starts with a need statement. Then it talks about, so what are you going to do to fulfill that need? How does your organization help with that problem? What are the gaps? Where are you falling short today? That's probably the hardest part, because you're all doing awesome work. But you're not doing what you could. And, you know, more annual fund money, a new building, a renovated building. So, you know, an endowment that would help you to have an ongoing resource of funds would all help. So what are you not doing? Then it's, and here's our project to fix it. You know, our problem is we don't have enough room. We can't segregate the sick animals from the well animals. We don't have a dedicated place where people can play with the animals and get to know them. We don't have, you know, blah, blah, blah. So our solution, we're gonna build a building that's twice our size, twice the size. It's gonna have this and this and this and this. And you wanna paint the picture. You're gonna talk about what you're gonna do, but also talk about why. We always come back to our why. Because it's easy to pick on, gee, why do you have a 12 by 15 room to greet animals? It should be a 15 by 18 room to greet animals. Who cares? Unless you're, you know, the city who's got mandates. Or an accrediting body. But if you talk about how important it is that potential owners and their animals bond even before they leave the shelter, and you can't do that in the chaos of, you know, with all the other animals around, blah, 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 then that they can get around. So focus on your why. Your case should end with the cost. And making this happen is going to cost, you know, $3.2 million. And use round numbers, maybe 3.25, but not 3,452,593. That's too much for someone to remember. They can remember, I don't even remember what I said. They could remember 3.6. So use the round number. And that's true regardless of what kind of campaign you're doing. Then what we do is from that, we create an external case for support. And the external case for support is the pretty document. So it's your marketing piece. It's probably 2 pages, you know, 1 piece of paper, front and back. It might be 4 pages. Like with that 11 by 17 folded in half. So you've got a little booklet. Maybe there's a page in there that's 6, but probably you don't want a whole lot more than that. And its purpose is not to solicit gifts. Its purpose is as a leave behind. Because I'm going to solicit most of these gifts, not via mail. I'm going to do it face to face.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that statement? This is going to be a what? It cut out just for a second. A leave?
A leave behind?
A leave behind. Okay.
Yep. And as I work with clients on these, often they're like, but it doesn't have, you know, there's no ask in it. And I say, that's not the purpose of it. You're not going to mail this to people and expect checks to come in. You're going to sit down with your donors face to face. You're going to talk to them about the campaign. You're going to utter the words, will you please make a gift of $100,000 to support this campaign? And after you have the conversation, you might use it to talk through with the donor, but you're going to leave it with them. It's not going to make the answer. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the second piece when you're planning your campaign. Before you've asked for $1, you got to come up with your case for support. Why are we doing this? And that could take, depending upon how well prepared you are, depending on where you are in the process, that could take you a couple months to pull that together. And often, you know, as you're working with your board, the case for support is one of those things you can use to help your board see why this is necessary, whether they're reading the whole case or you're using it as talking points, etc. Next step is a feasibility study. These aren't mandatory, but they're certainly helpful. And there's different types of feasibility studies. Your organization might be doing a financial feasibility study, might be doing a programmatic feasibility study, and a lot of that's happening with the architect. What do we need, right? Could we fill a building that's twice our size? What's the projected number of animals that are coming in? If you're in the COVID wave and we aren't going to need any more, then maybe you'll be good in a couple of years and you just need to hold on, right? People are getting cured from cancer. Are we going to still need the organization in 5 years? You know, that's a different kind of feasibility study. We're talking about a capital campaign feasibility study. And that study is going to ask and answer the question of how much money is available to fund this project. Very specific question. Because you might want to raise $10 million endowment, build a $5 million building, you know, add, yeah, you could do a feasibility study for annual fund campaign, but usually you don't do that. Which is all well and good, but do your donors want to give to that? When I was at Ambrose, one of the things we kept hearing about, everybody complained about parking. Every college campus I've ever worked on, everybody complained about parking. And so as we were planning this capital campaign, we said, all right, we could build a parking deck on the lower edge of campus. If you know the Ambrose campus, we were looking behind Galvin Hall and say we could build up, you know, 3-story parking deck, and that would add, I don't even remember how many slots, and that would take care of our parking problem. So we tested it. Guess what? Parking garages, outrageously expensive. It's like $100,000 per parking spot or something ridiculous. It was a couple million, maybe it was 10,000. It was a couple $1 million to build it. Second of all, donors love to complain about parking. They don't want to pay for it. There is no parking deck on the St. Ambrose campus today. Because what the feasibility study helps you prevent is, let's launch a $3 million campaign to build a parking deck. And let's spend all of our time and all of our resources building the case for support. And we'll talk about the other pieces that are there, soliciting donors and get 100,000 for this $3 million project. So it's a way of having some idea of what will be available. There was another project that we had, a successful one, the one building the health sciences building. And I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but you know, the initial building concept was like $20 million. This is what we need. And it came with like a $20 million price tag. And the feasibility study came back and said, you can raise 10. Maybe it was 10 and 5, I don't remember. And so it was then advancement could go back to the academics and say, we don't see 20 million. You've got to cut this back. You've got to cut it to a $10 million building. And I think they cut it to like a 12. And we easily, air quotes, raised 10 and struggled to get the last 2, but did get it. So it also can help you right size your project for your donor base. The other thing that a feasibility study does is it gets your donors engaged early. So how do you do a feasibility study? Oftentimes people hire external consultants to do them because what they're going to do is share your case for support and then ask them a series of questions. It's a one-on-one interview with about your top 20, 30 prospective donors. you should identify, we're talking about the campaign pyramid in a little bit. The top 10% of your donors should give 90% of your dollars. So who's the top 10% of your donors? And it will sit down one-on-one with each of those people and say, here's what the organization wants to do. Okay, Fort Madison Arts Association wants to raise $10 million in an endowment. And here's why. What do you think about the organization? Do you think they're doing good work? Do you think the arts are important in this community? What do you think of this campaign? You think they could do it? Sorry, that sounded negative. Do you think that they, do you think the money's in the community? And then it'll say, if you were asked to make a donation to this campaign, would you? And how much would you give? I'm not asking. I'm not committing. I'm not going to run back and say, ooh, they said X, Y, Z. It's just give me some idea. And then after those interviews, if you were hoping those 20 people, in order to make your campaign successful, would raise, $100,000 or $1 million, and it comes back that yes, they are. Okay, we've got some good confidence. If it came back and they give 10,000, you got a problem, right? And through the interviews, you start to identify what some of those problems are. I've done some feasibility, some that where I'm like, after the third interview going, this one's a slam dunk, that yes, this one will happen. Others where I'm getting mixed messages, and some it's just the community doesn't know you well enough. So yeah, while you're planning the campaign, in addition to these other steps, you need a marketing. Tell the community what you do, why you do it, why it's important. These donors don't know you. Go out and build relationships with the donors. So often it's not, no, you're awful, there's no way. It's often you're doing good work, but you need to do some groundwork. So rather than launching this in a year or whatever, do some groundwork, launch it in 2 years, and you'll be more successful. So the feasibility study helps you to do that. For those donors, you are engaging them at a very high level, because this isn't public yet. So nobody knows that you're doing this as an organization, which makes them insiders, which makes them special. Also lets them comment on your project. So it's not that, and I never, ever recommend that you change a project because a donor says the wall should be blue, not green. But sometimes different perspectives are useful. You go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Take it back, take that feedback back. And it makes them feel good, even if you don't take their suggestion that you asked. So lots of reasons to do a feasibility study. Okay. Next, or as part of the feasibility study, you also have to look at your internal capacity. I've yet to run across an organization where the development staff is sitting there twiddling their thumbs going, gee, I wish I had something to do and something to raise money for, right? If you're gonna run a capital campaign, you're probably still gonna do your annual fund campaign because you still have to operate. Same is true for an endowment campaign. And so now, in addition to raising $100,000 in operating, now we're also raising $3 million for capital. And that $3 million, let's even assume you're raising it over 3 years, you're still going from 100,000 to 1.1. That's a lot. That's a big jump. So do you have the capacity internally to do that? Do you have your staff have the knowledge to do that? Do you have the relationships with the major donors? You're going to need your executive director involved, because the large gifts, often the development staff do a lot of the legwork to start those relationships. The executive director gets to swoop in for the glory and make that ask. Some organizations have executive directors you don't want in front of people. Present company excluded, of course. But and there's some organizations where, you know, the executive director is phenomenal and ready to go. There's some where they're good, but need a little bit of training. They're green, right? You also need a really good volunteer structure. So do you have the volunteers? Is your database? Do you have a database? Working with a client now, it's not on a capital campaign, but they're new to fundraising. And I go, so do you have a database? Well, we're working on one. Okay, what is it? An Excel spreadsheet. I went, no. That might help you in the short term, but very quickly so even things like that, or yeah, we have a database, but we can't get anything out of it. Okay, that's not good. So, you know, there's lots of pieces that go into looking at your internal capacity. From those two, the feasibility study and the internal capacity study, which are often together, it's often part of the same study, should emerge a campaign plan. And that plan should include things like, how much can you raise? That's usually the first thing people look for. Is, all right, so how much money did you see out there? Should also include a time frame. How long will it take to raise it? And there's not a rule of thumb that says you can, you know, for every $3 million add a year. It depends where you are. It depends on your staffing. You could do it with your current staffing, but maybe it takes longer, right? The campaign plan should also talk about resources. You can do this, but you need to add 2 more staff. And here's what I recommend they do. Oftentimes I find the staffing that organizations need isn't necessarily a development person, and by which I mean an asker. It's an administrative person, so that the asker can actually spend their time asking and not processing gifts and, you know, all the administrative work that goes. And good news is that person's cheaper. So that also helps. Do you need external consulting? You know, if this is your 100th campaign you've done, maybe you're good. If this is the first one, maybe it's useful to have someone walking beside you and helping you with it. What's the structure? Volunteer structure. We're going to talk about engaging volunteers in a minute, but you know, what is that recommendation? So that kind of lays out your plan. Sometimes what you'll do is you'll phase a campaign. So it'll be, you know, if you've got 20 million is your goal, we'll pick on our theater friend with their $6 million HVAC and their $1 million seats and their $1 million bathroom. And by the way, I'm totally making all of this up, other than that they need it. And that HVAC is 6 million. Maybe they can't see 8 million. So maybe we do 2 phases of the campaign. And I don't know what their history with capital campaigns are. Maybe they've never run a campaign. 8 million is a whole lot to bite off the first time. So maybe we start with a $3 million campaign. And I'm not quite sure how you break up HVAC, but let's assume you could, you know, that they can do HVAC on this part of the building at the beginning, and that would be okay. Or they could replace this piece that's about to go, but leave the ductwork or what, you know, I don't know. And so we're going to spend the first 2 years on phase 1, which is a $3 million campaign. Then in years 4, 5, and 6, we'll raise the other 5. That's, you know, and the campaign plan would lay that out as well. Again, that's marketing. You don't want a campaign to run longer than about 3 to 5 years. And that doesn't include payment of pledges. That's just the active work. It's a lot of work. Your donors will burn out, your staff will burn out, your volunteers will burn out. In the middle, you're going to hit a wall. And that wall is very hard to push through. And if you've got to push through that wall and you have 3 more years to go, that's even harder. So you want to kind of look at that kind of time horizon to see what can you raise. Then your last step is the board has to approve. So you take all this information to your board. You say, we recommend that we launch a $3 million campaign that's gonna do A, B, C, and D. Here's the timeline we recommend. Here's the resources that we're gonna need to do it, et cetera, et cetera. Your board approves or does not, and you move on. Okay. When we talk about resources, I want to make sure that I say this. That is, you got to spend money to make money. Running a campaign, capital campaign, endowment campaign, anything is going to cost you money. The good news is you can wrap that cost into the campaign. And you can spend, you can raise that money as part of the campaign. Rule of thumb is that your campaign costs could be about 5 to 10% of your total campaign goal. And whether it's 5 or whether it's 10, somewhat depends upon what kind of infrastructure do you have and what do you need to add. If you don't have a database, if you don't have a development person, if you need to buy lists of donors, if you're going to be close to 10. At St. Ambrose, we already had the infrastructure. We did have a consultant. We did hire a few staff. My guess is we were even below 5. You're going to need more marketing materials. We did a lot of events, cultivation events. We bought a lot of people lunch. We did a lot more travel, all of that, those kinds of things, added expenses too. And so now our $1 million project, our cost is 1.1. And you can just kind of fold that into the cost, because the reality is the cost to build that building is going to be 1.1. It's not all in hammers and nails and concrete. Some of it is the work that it takes behind the scenes to get that. Okay, so, and your campaign plan should also be a campaign budget. For those of you local here in the Quad Cities, which I guess is just you guys, Humane Society, we have a contributors council that reviews capital campaigns. Lori, do you know if Fort Madison has anything like that, that reviews and not really approves, recommends, or does not recommend capital or campaigns?
I'm not aware of it yet. We do, I have floated this past our community foundation, our endowment plan, past our community foundation. I haven't, I've done a lot of talking at them. I haven't gotten much back for them in terms of how they would support me moving forward on this. And I intend to actually meet with them and ask them, what can we do together to make this more successful?
But that's more of a partnership than an approval process.
Right. Well, I met with the executive director of this community foundation back in January and outlined the plan, the amount that I was trying to get. He seemed to think it was doable, and that's sort of where we launched forward with this.
Okay, all right. And what we have here in the Quad Cities, from what I understand, is unusual. But and this came together in the 80s when the farm implement crisis happened and everybody needed money. And I hear everybody was doing a capital campaign, and there just wasn't enough money in the community to support it all. So what they did is the large funders have come together, and you submit an application to them, and it's very comprehensive. It talks about, did you do a feasibility study? How are you going to support this project in the future? What's your finances, etc. They review, they recommend, or they don't recommend. It is not mandatory you go through this, but it is very helpful. So it's one of those things where it's nice to know if there are special requirements like this in your community, and probably not, but here there is.
Yeah, no, I don't want to get tangled up with a whole lot of other people doing the same kind of ask, just because we're we're hoeing the same rows here. I mean, we really need to make sure. But when I met with Philip Ricketts, he seemed to think that this was, you know, somewhat doable. So I'm assuming that he has his finger on the pulse of the donor base. And, but I need to get their buy-in and involvement more. They just coincidentally approved a $7,500 ask for our HVAC system through a grant that I submitted. So I know I'm on their radar, and I'm going to use that as a sign of support also. But I'm not aware of that kind of an organization.
Okay,
You know, a donor contributor council. I have another question about how much longer would this session go? I do need to get my mother-in-law to her appointment this morning. So I
We
was gonna probably have to sign off here pretty quick, but I do want to, you know, understand more about the endowment thing. So I would go ahead and watch the rest.
yeah,
of
we're scheduled to 11:30.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to bolt here pretty quickly, but the planning process that you just outlined, it just needs to be flipped a little bit and made and tailored for an endowment process, correct? Okay.
Yep. And you could, I mean, other than the contributors council, you whether or not you do a feasibility study for an endowment campaign, I think you could. Maybe not, but the other parts, absolutely. And, you know, and your case for support, why do you need an endowment? Why is it important? For our endowment campaign at St. Ambrose, what we did was we, you know, named different types of endowment. So for, again, making up the numbers, $1 million, you can endow a professorship. For $3 million, you could endow a program. For, you know, and so we broke things down like that because that worked for us. You could do something similar or not, or just say, we need to endow the organization. Every gift you give would help us to do that.
Right. Yeah, no, I have been speaking these words in a variety of different ways. I think coming together and making a comprehensive document. I mean, we already have the piece that we're sort of circulating that outlines the broad strokes reasons, but I think being able to get the talking points all tied up in a nice little bow so that it's not just me, but all of my board members and my staff would be able to speak to this. I think that that's going to be very helpful. That's why I'm here. I just need to know my next steps and how to do this better so that we can become more successful. And I agree with you that 3 to 5 years seems much more. It's just that I'm going for 800,000, and that's a lot for our community because the donors all really do support a wide range of our community activities. They're the same people who are doing all of that. What I would probably want to make sure that I understand is the idea of pledging. Those ultimate gifts really are about eventual gifts. Right.
Yep.
So even if I could lock up those pledge dollars and how to have that kind of conversation. And I believed that the community foundation were going to be the people to help me understand how to do that.
And we're going to talk about that as well. I mean, the short answer is when you're talking about an ultimate gift, you're probably talking about them leaving you in their will, or creating some estate vehicle that once they pass, you get that fund. It could be life insurance, it could be an IRA distribution, et cetera. In which case you're getting lawyers involved, you're getting accountants involved on both sides. And so it's a pledge in a different sense of the word. So, I mean, the easy way to do it is when you're having a conversation with a major donor, because these are major donors, right? These are people who are very engaged and love your organization, because it's not going to be a person on the street. Hey, leave us in your estate. You don't know who we are. And so as you're having those conversations, have you considered leaving, the Fort Madison Art Center in your will, giving them the language, they put it in their will. The challenge is all of that is changeable. They can be mad at you tomorrow and take you out. So, not take you out, but take you out. But, and so you need to make sure you're continuing to steward them, keep them engaged, keep them involved, keep them happy. That's where a lot of organizations will have like a legacy society, an endowment society, where they're doing special things for that group of donors to keep them involved. And don't forget about their families. Because if somebody's going to contest it, obviously it's not going to be the donor. It would be their families. So make sure they're engaged and involved. And that's the short answer. When we talk through the endowment piece, we're going to talk about that some more. So I would say watch the video of the rest of the class when you get a chance. If you've got questions, send me an email. We'll set up a time we can talk about it in more detail.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry to not be able to be present for the rest of it. It's very interesting.
Yeah, good, no problem. And I'm glad you could join us for the first hour.
And actually, Linda, you and I have met. I'm with that cohort that you came out to do the Iowa Leadership Conference with. Yeah, when I was speaking with Ron, I'm like, wait a minute, we met. Okay, well, nice meeting the rest of you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Great, thanks, Lori.
Bye-bye.
Any other questions on planning a capital campaign? All right, let's talk
Hey, Linda,
about.
I had a quick question.
Certainly.
So, and you might have answered this already. Our board for CSC Washington DC, it's like split into two. So we have like an executive board, and then we have like an advisory board. And executive board is just the classic like strategic. They've been there probably for a few more years, smaller group. And then the advisory engagement board is more like folks that have roles within like the city. They're the ones that we get advice and counsel from for community projects, etc. When you're doing a capital campaign, which boards are you leveraging?
Both. Because, well, it's your executive board who has to approve it, because they're your governing board. So that's where you're getting that official approval from. But hopefully, presumably, every board member on both of those boards are well engaged and informed and love your organization. So we're going to talk about getting volunteers engaged here in a minute. You want to get both boards involved and leverage everybody you can.
All right, thanks.
Yep. And before I forget it, Lori brings up a good point too about the internal case. The other thing that's useful for is helping everybody get on message. Because you've got to focus your resources and you've got to focus your messaging. And that's a good way to educate your board, both of your boards, your volunteers, your staff, everybody, so they're on message. Because what you don't want is a donor asking someone else on your staff, so what's going on with this campaign? I don't know. And, so that everybody is working in development. All right, so once the board says, yes, you can go, you are officially in campaign mode. But we still haven't asked for $1, and we're still not going to ask for $1 yet. We're getting closer. So 3 phases of a capital campaign, maybe 4. First is pre-planning. You've done your early planning. Now you know this is going to happen. You really need to get down to brass tacks. First thing you need to do is develop a campaign pyramid. And the campaign pyramid tells you how many gifts you need at each level. And I put in the packet some samples of campaign pyramids, I believe, right? So here's a sample of a campaign pyramid. The top one is if you want to raise $1 million. So you're going to need a leadership gift of $250,000. This is the ideal. You're going to need 2 gifts of about 100,000. You're going to need 3 gifts of around that average 60,000, somewhere between 50 and 100. 4 gifts of 35,000 and above, 8 gifts of around 15,000. So that's 17 gifts of above $10,000. So you're going to actually start here when you're building your feasibility study invitation list. So who are those 17 people who can make a gift of 10,000 or above? That's who you're going to invite to your feasibility study. And I say people, but I also mean organizations. So yes, foundations, yes, corporations, but where are you going to get those dollars? The rule of thumb is it takes 4 prospects for every gift. So even though you need 17 gifts, you need 60-ish prospects. Can't do the math that fast. So who are those prospects? So now that the campaign's been approved, you start to fill them in. You start to put some names in there. So who's your $250,000 donor? Potential donor. Put the name or names. Who are those potential $100,000 donors? Put the names on there and on down the road. Okay. Also on this sheet, you see if you're going to do a $2.5 million campaign, you need a lead gift of about $500,000. You're going to need another gift of $250,000. You're going to need 4 at $150,000. So when you start thinking about campaign, it's the rule of thumb is that your first gift, your top gift's going to be about 20 to 25% of your goal. So that's a good place to start if, you know, people are thrown around like, oh, we need $5 million to do X, Y, Z. Okay. That means we're going to need a lead gift of about $1 million to $1.25. Where's that going to come from? And then the last one I threw out was $4.8 million campaign. These are actual pyramids I've done, which is why it's a weird number. You need a lead gift of about 1.5 million. And then 2.5 million. Who are those? Where are those gifts? And unlike the endowment campaign, which we'll talk about in a little bit, where these can be deferred, my assumption is you need cash. So unless you have someone whose deferred gift may mature quickly, you probably don't want to defer. So it, you know, that can change the dynamic as well. Does that make sense? And the pyramids really, these I build them on Excel. There are some online that you can do that'll fill them in. What you don't see is the columns on the other side, which is where I do the math to say, this is what percentage of our donors. This is what percentage of the total amount raised, so that I can see, am I at about 10% of our donors are given 90% of our funds. And none of these are perfect, but they're close. Okay. And if you add it up, you see to raise $1 million, you need about 100 donors. If you have the pyramid. Okay, make sense? Okay. Next thing, once you develop your pyramid, you add donors, which is what we just talked about. That'll also show you where your gaps are. Now, if instead of getting one $500,000 donor or 250, you got 3 125s, that works too, right? but you don't want to keep pushing that down, because then your 100 donors becomes 200 donors and it's a whole lot more work. Then you need to recruit campaign leadership. And you've got two different types of campaign leadership. You've got working leaders and you've got honorary or ceremonial leaders. And often your working leaders are almost ceremonial too, and some of that depends upon your staff. How much work is your staff doing? Let's start with your ceremonial leaders. Often you will have campaign chairs or honorary campaign chairs. Your honorary campaign chairs are what's going to lend credibility to your campaign. As you're recruiting these people, think about who has a passion for a mission, and people are going to go, oh, if they're involved, we've got to be involved. They must know what they're doing, right? Because they're part of this organization. And so some of that depends upon what your mission is. And Zubair, some of that might be where you use your advisory board. There may be people on there for you. It might be someone from the medical community, right? Where they'll lead oncologists in your community, where having their endorsement of your campaign is really important. It may, depending on what you're doing, it may be a city official. Similarly with you guys, maybe it's a prominent vet in the community.
I just wrote that down.
Well, you know, or I'm gonna say just air quotes, a prominent community leader. You know, I'm sure we can think about, you know, gee, if we had this person's name associated with our campaign, that would help. It also really helps if they bring a network and a different network, because people give to people. And so who can they help bring to the table? I've got a blog post online that if you could read more detail about it, about a campaign I helped with in Iowa City, Riverside Theater. They needed like $900,000 to build a new theater. They did it in the middle of the pandemic. We had long discussions about who would be their honorary co-chairs. And they ended up picking a couple and two individuals. And when they asked what role do you want us to play, and we had job descriptions and everything, and I recommend you do that too. We're like, really, it's whatever you want. We want your endorsement of the campaign. By the way, we also want your gift. You don't say that up front, but they know that. And usually they're one of those top gifts too. And anything else you want to do. They came to every meeting, pretty much. They were soliciting as much as everybody else. They really blurred the line between honorary and working in a good way. And that campaign was very successful. And so, you know, you can think about, you don't have to think about them as only honorary. They can certainly be part of it and have that conversation with them about here's why we're asking you, and tell them it's your credibility, right? It's people look up to you and respect you, and having you as part of this will certainly help us to raise the money. Two of the people they had were theater professors at the University of Iowa. One was an older woman who did a lot. I think she was theater, maybe she was English, but she did a lot of work with theater, very beloved, very well known. The other was a younger theater professor, very well known, very beloved, very different networks and very different, and they brought different things to the table, and it just worked out really well.
How many of these people would you have?
Generally, I'd say 2 or 3. You don't want, you know, here's our 50, doesn't feel very special. And we had long discussions about, is 4 too many? And one was a couple. Again, longtime supporters, very well known in the community. They knew everybody knew them, and it helped bring some credibility and brought some donors to it too. your working chairs are often board members. While staff are doing all the work. Shouldn't say that, asterisk. The campaign really is a board activity. So your board needs to be engaged in this for it to be successful. You need their networks. Which is why now is the time to start building your board with people with networks. That's one thing Riverside Theater did. When I came in, their board was phenomenal. They'd already had a major fundraising committee that we morphed into a major gift committee. They had people on there who weren't afraid to ask for money. They had people on there who we had to like pull the reins and go, whoa, slow down. That doesn't happen with volunteers. So you know, now is the time to start building your board and start thinking about who's going to lead the campaign. They had 2 board members who co-led the campaign. One of them had a family emergency in the middle, and so that was serendipitous because she had to step out for a couple months and the other one could step up and step in. And really, it was board leaders. They were the ones rallying the board. And while the staff did a lot of the work, it was still board driven. And so it would be, you know, the board saying, executive director, can you talk to this person, fundraising person, can you give to this person? And actually their fundraising staff didn't do very many asks, not till the end.
Oh, that sounds nice.
And they turned over their fundraising staff in the middle. You don't do that. That's a no-no. But it worked and they hit their goal when they had to hit it. So recruiting who your campaign leadership is important as well. Then you need to recruit volunteers and you need to figure out what's your structure. I like to build different committees to help with the campaign, the different aspects. Probably your most important committee is your major gift committee. Those are the people who are going to help identify who are those 17 people at the top of the pyramid. Those are the people who are going to engage those people, who are going to introduce you to those people. And if you are really lucky, are going to solicit those people. And that's what Riverside had. They had people, you know, usually you go, okay, we need to talk to Joe Blow. Who knows Joe and who can talk to him? And everybody's looking down like, don't call on me, don't call on me. We would have 3 people go, oh yeah, I know him. Oh yeah, I know him. Yeah, well, I know him too. And it was almost like they weren't fighting, but you know, okay, who gets to talk to him? But the other thing they realized was the importance of people give to people. So they would have conversations about who has the better relationship to go talk to this person. And sometimes it would be, hey, you and I, why don't we both invite him to coffee and talk to him about it? And, you know, it worked. So, you know, so major gift committee is one. We would often do a public campaign committee. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. And that's for more of the broad-based solicitation. That's really for the people who don't want to ask for money, to give them something to do. Sometimes we'll have a corporate and foundation committee. Sometimes that'll get wrapped into the major gift committee, kind of depending upon how different are your lists. And that's engaging corporate and foundation people. Some of that also depends upon who are your donors, who's your board. There are some who are just really well connected in the business community and that's what they're comfortable with. So separate them out. Riverside, we started with those separate and they ended up merging. Some of it's going to be a lot of the same people. And then the last committee is a stewardship committee. Those are the people who really don't want to talk to people. It's really important to steward your donors. They're writing thank yous. They're making phone calls. When we do a wrap-up event, that committee will help plan the wrap-up event. So you want to recruit people to serve on those committees. You start with your board. I like to have every board member serving on a committee. that keeps them involved and engaged in the campaign. And if you're lucky, your board chair will make it an expectation that everyone serves on a committee. But you can also recruit others from the community to serve on those committees. I'm working on a campaign now, and on the major gift committee are board members, but there's also the voluntary co-chair is on that committee, and he's very active and has gotten a ton of money. There's a former board member on that committee, again, very active, has gotten tons of money. And there's somebody who's a friend of the organization who actually has an expertise in like plan giving, who's also been very helpful on that committee. So you don't have to look just at board. But recruit your volunteers, again, have job descriptions. I think that really helps when you're recruiting volunteers for them to know what it is that they need to be doing. You need to develop your marketing materials. Don't let this be a stymie to launching the campaign, though. Your marketing materials start with your external things. If it tested well during the feasibility study, you can just print more copies. If it didn't test well, or you changed your campaign, then tweak it and print more copies. Make sure you have pledge cards. Make sure, you know, if you're going to name your campaign or brand your campaign, all of this stuff is branded with your campaign, so it's very clear what it is and who you is. Start thinking about a website, but a website doesn't need to go public yet because your campaign's not public yet. The one thing I see organizations doing, though, is getting hung up on the marketing materials and like, we can't go talk to anybody until we have a brochure. Yes, you can start talking to people. Because now you're delaying it. And often that's a stall tactic. It shouldn't take you very long to create a pledge card.
No. And
the reality is, have them send you an email that says, yes, I pledge $100,000. That works too. And it's all a leave behind, so you can still have conversations, but you still want to make sure you have it. Questions on pre-planning? Oops, I had another one. Hire staff. I was debating whether that was the end of it. If you need more staff, now is the time to start hiring them, getting them on board. Now, do you have any questions on pre-planning? All right, before we dive into the campaign, let's take about a 5-minute break. It's a couple minutes before 10. So, well, here, we'll come back about 5 after.
sounds like fun.
They actually are.
Well, you do this all the time. It's your job.
But you know,
It does sound exciting though.
but if you truly, no, I don't want to say that sounds wrong. You need a new facility.
Mhm.
You can see how it's going to make
Yeah.
a huge difference to your organization. It's also exciting.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, but it's exciting.
feel like for us, we would need like a government committee for like handling the asks for all the cities.
Mhm. And
Cause
like,
honestly,
looking at
that's, I'm thinking get pyramid wise, like, that's where we're gonna need our biggest gifts from.
Mhm. I mean, and they should be if we're holding the contract. It's silly to think that the city shouldn't think that they fund a large portion of that.
I was just thinking, it was one of my notes, I was like, how do we like with this whole contract stuff, like,
I think until we figure that out, we
yeah,
can't really plan much else, honestly.
yeah. And we can't, like, I wouldn't want to put something like that in a negotiation, like, oh yeah, we want to raise our thing and we want you to give us
Mhm.
money.
Mm,
I mean, like, we could, don't get me
I think
wrong.
yeah, because I think it's part of the piece is like, we need more
support.
funding because we're not being
Yeah.
funded appropriately to operate in the first place, but we also can't operate well in this building long
Yeah.
term. So it is part of the big overall piece.
Yeah,
I'm interested to talk to the other places. It's hard to find contact information for the other shelters. The two government ones don't have people listed because they typically don't. And then, so like, I reached out to Preston to ask him, I was like, do you have contacts at these places? Cedar Rapids, he obviously does.
yeah, that's a good
But
idea.
I don't know about Sioux City. I have a contact at Siouxland Humane Society, but it's
Different,
not the city
and it's
shelter.
private, yeah.
I still want to talk to them to see what effect they have to essentially assist
Mhm.
the city shelter, because they're both in the city.
Yeah,
Cedar Rapids is very different because they have the city shelter, and then they have Cedar
Cedar
Valley that's
Valley.
outlying, and then they have one like the one in Cedar Bend and Waterloo that's very like, there's a lot of large ones kind of
close
tied in.
together.
Yeah. Whereas
We don't really have that.
we don't,
Yeah,
because I mean, I think Rock Island and Milan work better together in terms of Milan takes in quite a lot of strays now, I've noticed.
Mhm.
They're taking in a lot,
yeah.
but we don't have that in our county.
No,
Cats we do.
yeah,
I mean, Kings takes in a lot of cats and they're not transferring cats in,
they're not transferring
but
dogs
they're
from us either.
not taking dogs from the community by any means,
Yeah.
so. We don't have that kind of extra. That's why I'm wondering how the other ones operate.
Mhm.
Those are also large. I would think they take in from the community
Mhm.
because their
They probably do both.
King's intake is only, I looked it up, 1,100 last year. And so I know how many of those have to be dogs coming in.
From the south.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it's something we just have to know that we can't say that we have that assistance.
Because
Like,
we don't.
these other places are paid more for their services and they have somebody that's assisting the county
Yeah,
in general.
in the community as a whole.
Mhm.
All right, we're ready to launch the campaign. We're halfway in and we're about to ask for money. So the campaign itself proceeds in two different phases. We start with the quiet phase. And in the quiet phase, you're not public about the campaign. Now, you're talking about it in public, but you're soliciting the leadership gifts and you're soliciting your major donors. So you're getting that top 10% of your gifts in. And you're doing it this way for a couple of reasons. One is if you go out to the community and you say, hey, we need $3 million to build a new building, and we haven't raised a penny, will you give us some money? They're gonna go, yeah, no, right? People want to give to a winner. So be a winner first, and you do that by raising money before you go to the broader community. Second reason is that you want to give those larger donors an opportunity to make larger gifts. If you went to the broader community, they might give you $1,000, but if they give you 1,000, they could probably give you 10,000 or more if you actually sat down and had a conversation with them. And a lot of your major donors want to feel special.
Mhm.
And that's a way to make them feel special. You're one of the first to know, we're doing this project. We want to let you get in early. and be one of our lead donors to show our community how important this is. This is also when you solicit your board. Your board should be one of the first groups that you solicit, which, by the way, is another campaign committee, board solicitation committee. That's a committee that starts early and finishes fast, because you want to be able to tell your donors, we have 100% board participation. Sometimes you're doing a lot of chasing of your board to get those and to get but hopefully your board chair, the executive director, has set the expectation that everyone on the board will make a contribution to this campaign. Depending on your board, this can also be pretty big bucks. Depending on your board, it may not be, but 100% board participation is important. And this is where, if you're doing an endowment campaign, and these are similar between the two kinds of campaigns, oftentimes we forget to solicit our board to ask them to leave the organization in their estate plans. So it may be, and you may or may not get 100% board participation in an endowment campaign, but I would at least solicit everybody to ask them to, put the organization in their will. If they're passionate about your cause, then I would think they would be willing to do that. Hopefully those gifts don't mature for many, many, many years. But to be able to say our board supports this campaign is important as well. As I said, you're going to solicit the leadership gifts, your campaign pyramid that has names. You're going to start at the top and you're going to work your way down. And you're going to because you want to focus on those top donors, so that when you go to your $25,000 donor, you can say, we've already raised XYZ. We've got a $250,000 gift in. We've got, and it also, if you probably have one or two prospects at the 250 level. If you don't get those, you can also fairly early adjust your campaign or panic. We thought we were going to be able to get, 1 million. Now maybe we need to even scale back further. And that's early enough to do that. Or, okay, we didn't get the 250. Now we need 3 100s. How are we going to get that? So it lets you adjust as well. Now, the only exception to work your way down the pyramid are when corporations and foundations, when their deadlines come up, ask them for money. Right, I mean, which may or may not be.
So I'm thinking like foundation gifts, like I know like RDA and SERA will support capital campaigns, but I know a lot of in their rules, you have to use this gift within a year or so. When do you solicit them?
Early,
okay.
And there's a couple things that you can do. One is I've even sub-phased the projects. So depending upon what your timeline for the project is, use that money to pay the architectural drawings.
Okay.
Use that, well, and you could also, if there's a big lag, if you're in the planning stages or the pre-planning stages, you can get foundation money or donor money to help you pay for that too. Maybe that's if you're hiring a consultant, maybe that money's helping to pay for that. I don't know that I'd like that report. If you're, you've got to do some groundwork, right, to prepare the site or something like that, use it for that.
Okay.
The other thing you do is you go back to them and say, we haven't broken ground yet. We're still working on it. Can we have another 6 months? And most of the time they'll say yes.
Okay. That makes sense.
And the other part of that answer is talk to the funder, right? Matt, here's what we're planning to do. We've got this plan. We've got this timeline. We would love RDA to come in at blah, 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 or, is that feasible? Let's talk timing. Tell us when is a good time for us to come? Because the other thing you've got to think about is competition, right? And he'll know, oh, you know what? we've got big asks coming from A, B, C, and D. So it's gonna be really competitive this cycle. I'd wait till spring, because by then we'll have paid off this one and this one. And you don't know what's gonna come up between now and then, but you also now, you're, I'm gonna say, in line, which doesn't mean someone wouldn't bump you
Mhm.
if there's a higher priority.
Yeah.
It's a good question. After you solicit leadership gifts, you're gonna solicit major gifts. Major gifts are defined as gifts at the level that causes your donor to think. So it's, I can give $50 without even thinking about it, $100 without thinking about it, right? Everybody's got their different level that, you see something on Facebook and you go, okay, I'll give to that. It's when you kind of have to talk to your partner or plan it out or otherwise really think about it. That's a major gift. So it's not really a level. Generally, I think it's, if we had to put a level on it, 10,000 and above, 5,000 and above, depends on your donor. Really, the question is who needs a face-to-face request? That's a major donor. Okay? That phase can go on for a year, go on for hopefully not 2 years. So as I said, you're gonna get tired. You're gonna go out of the gate enthusiastic. People aren't gonna call you back. It's gonna take them a while to ask. But the other thing, as I said at the beginning, that the capital campaign structure does is creates urgency. So, I get annual fund appeal letters, let's say once a week, right? And I can kind of go, oh, Humane Society, yeah, I should give to them. And I can put it aside. What I usually do is put it in the bills. And often my husband will go, what's this? And not pay it. But whether I pay it this month, next month, the following month, this year, next year, right? I know it matters to you guys because you need the cash, but it doesn't matter because you still need the cash, right? What the capital campaign does is kind of puts that deadline on it. And so for the major gift phase, your deadline is the public phase. It's when you're announcing it to the public. So you announce when you have about 65 to 75% of your goal raised. And that's often fluid because you don't say, okay, let's announce tomorrow. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. And so what you're doing is you're sticking a flag in the ground. If you saw last week, the Butterworth Foundation announced their campaign. They're raising 3.2 million for Dear Wyman House. They did a phenomenal announcement. So if you haven't seen it, look at what they've done. And they have a phenomenal.
What are they called?
It's the William Butterworth Foundation over in Moline. And I will, in the true transparency, I'm working on that campaign,
Okay.
but it was phenomenal. And so when they came out to announce, if they had said, we need to raise $3.2 million to renovate Dear Wyman House, and we've got 500,000, we've got another 2.7 to raise, people would be like, yeah, right? So they had 2.1 million in hand. That was part of the story. Part of the story was who they'd already gotten gifts from. And now they have only $1 million left, right? And a lot of publicity about it. Now they're soliciting the general public for those $100 gifts, etc. So you want to look at, as you're getting closer to that 65-75% raise, to start to go, okay, when's a good time for us to announce? And it takes some time. So when are you not busy? When are you not competing with yourself? When are you not competing with something else? Do you have an anniversary coming up? Do you have, something you can tie it to, etc.? They picked June partially because the grounds will be very pretty. And they were, and the photos were phenomenal because they had all the flowers out, you know. In the fall would be pretty too. We didn't want to wait that long. They have camps coming up, so they would have been too busy, so it just fit nicely. The other thing it does is now they launched on the 13th. So now you can go to your major donors and say, we're publicly announcing this campaign on June 13th. We'd like to get your gift in. We'd like to know your commitment so we can announce to the public the largest dollar amount we can, right? That makes us look better. You're always on the donor's time frame, right? If they're gonna give you $100,000 on the 14th, you take it, right? But that creates some urgency for them to make the decision. This is when you publicly announce the campaign. They did a press conference, and now it's out there in the public. Then the other thing they did, and the other thing you're doing is you're soliciting broad-based support. So they had letters ready that dropped on the 13th, were in mailboxes the 14th and 15th, asking people for money. They also have on their website, they're asking people for money. So it's not just we're putting it out there, but we have a mechanism to collect dollars, and we are actively soliciting those dollars. And so, you know, the letters we've been working on for 6 weeks beforehand and had them ready to drop that day. So that they were in May, and we were debating, do they get mailboxes that day or do we drop them that day? But you've got to make sure you're soliciting. The other thing, and I think we talked about this in some of the other fundraising classes, this is not a one and done. So the plan going forward is to say, okay, let's check in. How are we doing? Do we need to send another letter? Do we need to do an email? Do we need to, and they're, follow them on Facebook because they're doing a lot on Facebook and LinkedIn. So that's another way to start getting that support. So it's continuing to pepper the community, which is something else Riverside Theater did. They had planned to do a big dump of publicity that just, and I don't remember why it didn't work. So they ended up having to spread it out. They had a press conference, the solicitation went out a month later, and then there was another one, and then it was part of the end of the year. And that ended up bringing people in at different times rather than saturating the market at once. You weren't paying attention, or we were hoping there would not be a press conference on the downtown building that day because that would have totally changed the press. Things fell into place, but a lot of them. So you're soliciting your broad-based support. You're also continuing to solicit major and leadership gifts. And hopefully hopefully you're getting good publicity, and what that's doing now is encouraging some major gifts. Some people may come out of the woodwork who you didn't expect, who might be interested in making a major gift. So you're paying attention to that, and continuing to solicit. It doesn't mean you're done. Nope, we're only taking $100 donations now. It just means that's where your focus is. Then when you're done, when you hit your goal, you do the wrap up. First thing you got to do is the work. So whatever you said you're going to do, you're going to complete the projects. And probably most important you're going to do is celebrate. And sometimes you can have multiple celebrations. So you might do, depending upon how the timing of the projects and the campaign, the money is going. If you can't break ground until you have the campaign completed, maybe you celebrate the end of the campaign with a groundbreaking, right? Maybe your board has said, once we have 75% of the money committed, then we can break ground because we can see we're going to have it, and we'll get a bridge loan for the difference, in which case maybe your campaign kickoff is a groundbreaking, right? Or maybe you do a campaign kickoff and then you do a groundbreaking, anything to draw attention to what it is you're doing. You do want to be careful because if your project is complete before your money, that urgency goes away.
Mm.
Because you don't need my money other than to pay your mortgage, and I'm sorry, that's not very
Mhm.
enticing. And I've got this other project over here that it can't be completed without my money, so I'm gonna give it to them. It's not impossible if you have to start the project ahead of time, but it does make it much harder. And there are reasons why sometimes you do. I don't know if you're familiar with Dress for Success.
Mhm.
Their building downtown was destroyed in the 2019 flood. They had to move. They went into a temporary building, then they bought a building, and all of this happened in the matter of a couple months because they didn't have a choice. So they had to do a capital campaign with the building already there.
Mhm.
Then they had a pandemic, but so not easy, but that's part of the story.
Mhm.
And you hate to call a massive flood lucky, but in some ways that played to their advantage. I mean,
Mhm.
the national news showed them bringing their staff out of the building. So it was, there was a lot of knowledge around it, and it was a organization that had a lot of good donors before that. So not ideal, but you kind of have to deal with the hand you're dealt and make the best of it. But do celebrate when you complete the projects, whether that shows the end of the campaign or not. And in all of this, what you're doing is you're celebrating and thanking your donors. You're thanking your donors throughout. I recommend sending like a quarterly update to your major donors throughout the entire campaign. Because they might give a gift tomorrow, and all of this might be happening in 2 or 3 years, and you don't want them forgetting about you. And if you are short at the end, one of the things you can do is go back to your first donors. They had a passion for the project and say, thank you, thank you, thank you. We so appreciate, the 100,000 you gave us 2 years ago to get this project started. We couldn't have started it without you. We're $500,000 short. Could you make another gift of 50,000 or something like that? Don't forget to celebrate and thank your volunteers. Depending upon how you're going to celebrate your campaign, whether it's, at Ambrose, we did a formal dinner for folks. So it might be, I don't want to say just a ribbon cutting, because that should be a big celebration anyway. But somehow make sure you are thanking your volunteers for what they did. Handwritten note. Ambrose, we had like one of the projects cut down a bunch of the oak trees in front of campus, which are kind of iconic. And so we found a woodworker who made acorns out of them. And so, gave those to the major donors and to the volunteers. So think about a way to make sure you're thanking them, and make sure your thank you is commensurate with what they gave. Don't forget to celebrate and thank. Which sounds odd because you're going, yay me. But I mean, if it has to be you taking a minute, just going, yay me, or just saying, I'm taking the day off and going to the spa, do that, but make sure, because you're the ones who are probably thinking about this for the rest of the staff, make sure you're thanking the rest of the staff. Oh, and I didn't mention, when in the leadership phase, solicit your staff. Probably not big dollars, but to be able to say 100% of our staff gave to this campaign, very powerful language. And solicit your staff by explaining to them why you're asking them to give. Because don't just ask them to give, because they all work for a nonprofit, which means they don't make a lot of money. They do a whole lot of work. When you put it in terms of here's what we're doing, here's why this is important. We truly want participation and reward participation, not dollar amounts. That's important too. In that phase two, your executive director should make a pledge. Development staff should make a pledge. You should not ask before you have committed. So that's another piece in that phase. Questions? About capital campaigns. Zubair, any questions on your end?
No, I'm good. This is good info.
Okay, good. And I kind of thought we'd get to endowments with about an hour left. So let's talk about endowments. Switching from coffee to water. A lot of what we just talked about with capital campaigns also applies to endowment campaigns, and I've been kind of weaving some of that throughout. So we'll talk a little bit about how they're similar, but also what is different about an endowment and about an endowment campaign. So let's start with what is an endowment. First of all, do either of you have endowments? You guys have one?
We have a really small one with the community foundation, and then we just have an investment account.
Okay. So Barry, do you guys have an endowment?
No, I think our partners do, like a lot of the healthcare organizations we work with, but we ourselves, we don't have an endowment.
Okay, okay. And that's fine. A lot of organizations don't. They're good to have. And when organizations will come to me and say, hey, should we have an endowment? I go, yes, but it's not a simple answer. So what is an endowment? Basically, it's money you invest today to fund the organization in the future. Think of it as your retirement account. Although for an organization, you don't have to wait till you retire, you can draw off it every year. In general, you're going to spend the interest and save the principal. So rule of thumb is generally you figure you can spend about 5% of how much you have in there is available for you to spend. So if you think about it that way, it takes, let me do the math real fast, $1 million for every 5,000 that you would spend. So people are like, oh, we need a, let's get endowment, which will pay the 50,000 we need for XYZ. That's a $10 million endowment. Okay. Now you don't have to spend all the interest. You can reinvest it, which will grow the principal faster, which will grow the money faster. 5% is a rule of thumb. It depends what the market's doing. My guess is right now they're not paying at 5%. Whereas in the past couple of years, maybe they were at 7 or 8%. Your board kind of sets that spending principle. A lot of the foundations are going to a 12-quarter rolling average so that they don't have the spikes, so that it's a little bit more consistent. So your board will determine what's the spending policy, but in general, for planning purposes, I always figure out about 5% is a good way to think, and it's fairly easy. What it does is it provides for the long-term security of your organization. If you had a $10 million endowment without doing any work, you would have $50,000 every year, which would grow because your endowment would grow. So that, think about that in your own personal finance. If all of a sudden you got 50,000 every year and then you just had to figure your expenses from there, life would be a lot easier, wouldn't it? And same thing for your organization. To have an endowment campaign, it's a little bit more, I want to say challenging. There's more things you need to think about than a capital campaign. One thing you need to have is the ability to forego some immediate cash for tomorrow. So I was working with a fairly new organization. We need an endowment. Everybody tells us we need an endowment. By the way, everybody will tell you you need an endowment. And yes, that's true, but. So if I'm soliciting for $100,000 annual fund campaign every year, where are my donors gonna come from for my endowment? Right? Either they're gonna put you in their state, which is good, yes, which you aren't gonna get for years, yes, but it's still good for in years. Or they're gonna make a gift to your endowment out of their pocket, which will probably look a lot like their annual gift. So if I've got a $20,000 donor who will either give to my endowment or my annual fund, can you get rid of 20,000 in your annual fund to move it to your endowment? Some organizations get to that point. If you're at that point, then I'm like, okay, then you're ready for an endowment. But if you are struggling year in and year out just to meet your goal to pay your bills, you probably either don't have the development program yet that's ready, or as an organization, you can't. That makes sense?
Mhm.
I think of it like when you're starting a professional and everybody says, right, you gotta put money away in your retirement account. If your organization offers a 501k, use it. And I remember that when we were first starting out. I'm going, yeah, that sounds really good. But I need every penny we bring in to pay the rent, the more, food, car payment, student loans, etc. That in theory, it sounds good, but you still gotta eat. So if you still gotta eat, you're probably not ready to do it, build it and down. The other thing you need are dedicated, passionate donors. Your best plan giving donors are the ones who have given to your organization for many, many, many years. They can be low-level donors. If they are consistent donors, they're a good prospect to make a plan gift. And by a plan gift, I mean an estate gift. I mean any gift generally that requires them to consult their attorney, to consult their accountant, their financial planner. The easiest is putting you in their will. There are many, many more complicated ways to do it, but that's kind of the easiest way to think about it. If you don't have a long-term funding program where you can look and see, or you don't have the data where you can say, these are my 10-year consistent donors, you're probably not ready for an endowment. The other thing you need, I think, is next, a strong major gift program. Because in general, these donors, you're going to be soliciting your major donors as part of this. They're the one, well, certainly, a couple thousand out of someone's estate is nice. You want the 6, 7, 8 figure gifts, right? And those are the donors, those are your major donors. And the chance that I'm going to go from giving you $50 a year to, 5 million in my estate are pretty low. Not impossible, they do happen, that's what makes the news. But it makes the news because it's not normal, quote unquote normal. So if you want to have an endowment campaign, if you want to build an endowment, build your major gift program first. And that'll be a strong foundation. Your organization needs a sense of longevity. There needs to be a feeling among your donors that you're going to still be here in 10 years, 50 years, whenever my estate matures, right? There's a lot of very young organizations that, we need to build an endowment. And like, okay, you're still on the founder. Is this going to continue once the founder leaves? What are you putting in place? If you're at that stage, an endowment sounds really good, but I think you're going to struggle to try and build an endowment. And you need patience, a lot of patience. I remember when I was at St. Ambrose, Augustana got their largest gift to date, which, well, I don't remember what it was. Let's say $20 million. And at the time it was like huge, and they probably topped it many times. And my boss, who was the vice president, talked to the vice president there and said, how long did it take for this gift to come in? He said it's about 30 years. It started by talking to this donor, probably not too long after he graduated. And just continuing to talk to him, to engage him. He moved from a annual donor to a major donor to a leadership donor, probably a board member. And then, you know, at that point was ready to make that ultimate transformational gift. Now, you don't need $20 million.
I mean, it'd be
It
nice.
would be nice. But think about it in scope, right? For you guys, maybe that's $100,000 gift or $1 million gift. And so again, it's going to take some time. The gifts that you're planning today, probably your successor or your successor's successors will probably reap the benefits of, which doesn't mean don't do it. It just means you need to be prepared for that, and don't spend the money today, because it'll be many years before you have the money as well. And I'm talking about the top of your pyramid. Certainly as an endowment campaign, it works on the same gift pyramid. You can get those $1,000 donors, those $100. But think about it, your $1,000 gift is going to give you $5 a year. Do you want $1,000 today? Do you want $5 a year for every year forever? Right? And that's an organizational question about how can you forego your 1,000 today for 5 instead? There's also among donors, there are donors who love endowment. There are donors who hate endowment. So there are some people who are like, yep, I want to support you forever. And you know, you need an endowment, you need to have this sense of longevity, and I want to be part of it. There are some donors who are like, nope, I want to give, I want you to have it today. I want you to spend it today. I want to help you today. Neither is right or wrong. It's just a different philosophy. So you also are going to need to approach your donors differently, find out where they stand on it, and then slot them a little bit differently. It might be, oh, you'd be a great endowment donor, but if I don't believe in endowment, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
I was working with an organization many, many years ago, and we were helping to develop their fund development plan. And it was a senior center, so they had a lot of really good plan giving prospects there. But when we talked about it, we were doing focus groups with the organization members, and they were like, well, what about an endowment? I swear they almost came to fisticuffs, because it was like, yes, endowment, no endowment, yes, no. And it really, what it demonstrated to me was just how passionate that divide can be about whether it's important. And like I say, no one was right. It's just a different philosophy. So you've got to find those as well. So when you're planning for an endowment campaign, first thing you need is pay some support. Why do you need an endowment? And if you can, and I think I mentioned this earlier, if there's ways to break up your endowment, so it's not just a black hole, kind of like you do your annual campaign, right? We want to endow for 25,000, you can endow, a kennel, right? And this will be the Linda Waston endowed kennel forever and ever. But you got to think, if that's given 5%, that's 500 a year, right? So that dollar amount's probably way too low. For $1.5 million, you can endow the directorship. For, 2 million, you can endow this particular support program that we've got. So you break it up so that you have something specific to talk to your donors. You don't have to do it that way. Sometimes that can be appealing. The other thing that's not in the handouts that's important is that you have a gift acceptance policy. So people come up with lots of crazy ways they want to support you. I'd love to give you my house, and you're going, okay, it's a pit and we can't use it and it's not something we want. Having a gift acceptance policy will help you with that. And an endowment policy. So At Ambrose, I believe you couldn't have a named endowment for less than 50,000. And they may have upped that since I left,
Mhm.
because finance office doesn't want to manage a whole bunch of $10,000 endowments. And I think you couldn't name a scholarship for less than, 100,000 or something. So do you have a floor at which you will endow something and name it? Different if you want to just put it into the main endowment pot, as well. Some of the other technical pieces of that is who's going to manage your endowment, what's your spending policy. Once you have an endowment, your finance committee needs to figure out all of those pieces. And, Lori was talking about partnering with their community foundation. That can be a good partnership to have. A lot of community foundations will manage your endowment. And you said you have an endowment with the community foundation. And so that can be a way to take that responsibility off of your organization, especially with a small endowment. But there are fees involved, and you also have to do your due diligence and your homework there. So, your case for support is both external in this case, but bullet I forgot was you gotta have all your internal ducks in a row too, and all your policies and procedures set up. Do you do a feasibility study? Maybe, and maybe this one could be a little less formal. You certainly could do a formal feasibility study. I've done them for projects that have endowments. Often what I've seen and what can work really well is to marry a capital campaign and an endowment campaign. Because when you double the size of your facility, for example, you're going to add expenses. How are you going to pay for those expenses? Now your annual fund just doubled. Well, if while we're out raising $3 million, we may as well raise 4 and have another $1 million for an endowment that will then help pay for, gives us 50,000 a year to pay for operating expenses. So that's another way, you can marry the two together. And if you're going to do that, test it in the feasibility study. If you're not going to do that, then you could certainly go out and ask people what they think about it.
And for something like that, would you probably try to figure out like how much you have for your capital campaign first? Because like if you end up having like way more top donors than you thought, like then something like this would be realistic. But if you're struggling to reach those pyramid gifts, then this isn't, right?
Probably,
Okay.
yeah. But like I said, your endowment donors are different than yes, they can be the same people,
Mhm.
but they can also be very different people. Because I have to be liquid to give you a capital gift, because you're gonna want cash or stock or something you can quickly turn to cash. Somebody who's not liquid might be able to make a gift to your endowment because that's coming out of their estate.
Okay.
Or, well, and it could be either one, but like, was if you're 70 and a half, I think it still is. You have a minimum distribution from your IRA you have to make. They could make that to your endowment. They could make that to your capital. You could get a life insurance gift. Here, well, it could go to either, but it's easier in your endowment. Retirement accounts too. Depending on the age of your donor, whatever's left in their retirement account, their kids may not need. I mean, if they're in their 80s, 90s, their kids are in their 60s, 70s, they're probably using their own retirement account. They may or may not need theirs. That might be something that the proceeds could go to an endowment. So yes and no. It's yes, your
Mhm.
thinking is right, but it's not quite that linear,
Okay.
is what you're saying.
No, I get what you mean.
Yep. The one thing to think about when you're thinking about donors, though, corporations, foundations, not going to give to your endowment. That's almost 100% accurate.
Mhm.
And I was doing a feasibility study for a capital campaign that had an endowment component. And I asked one of the foundation people I know, I'm like, and I think this person was saying, yeah, we don't give to endowment. And I'm like, I'm just curious. I assume that, but why? And the answer was, we'd rather keep it in our endowment. We can manage it, raise the money and do good in the community, rather than giving it to you to invest.
Mhm.
Right. So yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. So you're looking at individual donors as well. You will look at your internal capacity. Same kinds of questions. Generally, an endowment campaign is spread out more because you've got fewer donors at higher level. And because it takes so long for the gifts to mature, you count them before they mature. You count them when you get it's called an expectancy, similar to a pledge, even though you don't see them. So you can talk about your campaign in different ways, but you're still, if we needed 100 donors to raise $1 million for the capital campaign, which means 400 donor prospects, you're probably talking about 50 for an endowment campaign. So again, your capacity is different, but what you need is some expertise. If you're looking at getting planned gifts, you got to have people who will sit down with people, and not every fundraiser likes to sit down with people and build relationships. You have to build trusting relationships, because I'm not going to give half my estate to an organization I don't trust, right? And the people are the conduit to the organization. So internal capacity is important. You don't have to be an accountant or an attorney to know all the different plan giving vehicles. I think it's useful to be conversational in the major ones. Easiest one is, will you leave us in your will? You can ask your board that tomorrow, right? Can we be the residual on your life insurance policy or on your retirement account? That's similar to being in your will. Difference is it doesn't go through probate. So I think that there's some advantage there for you all in terms of speed, is what I recall. Then there's gifts of property. You can do trusts, you can do annuities. There's some things where they can get income during their lifetime and you get the gift when they pass. So they could set up an annuity with you. Let's say it's $1 million. It's paying them 5%. What did we say that was? 50,000 a year. And then it's growing, hopefully. And then when they pass, that $1 million, which is now $1.2 million, $1.5 million, 750,000 is going to you. So there are life income kinds of things, and you just used up my knowledge of that. Trusts are similar. There's a whole bunch of other ways you can set those up. Knowing that there are life income arrangements, knowing in general what it is, and then sending them to their advisors is really what you need to know at the development officer level. But you've got to say, do we have people who are willing to have these conversations with people? You'd be surprised. Do we have people who have this knowledge? Maybe not, probably not. Then part of your plan is go get it, right? And there's plenty of training. Locally, there's a plan giving council that will give you more information than you ever wanted to know. I went to one meeting. It was a joint meeting between the Plan Giving Council and AFP. And oh my gosh, this person was talking so far here. Learned more than I ever wanted. Then you need a campaign plan. Campaign plan is similar. What's your goal? What's your time frame? Who's your, what's your pyramid? Who's your donors? Again, it's longer, kind of time horizon. But I, again, would kind of look at your 3 to 5 years, you're going to burn out before then. And unlike the other campaign, a capital campaign, you're gonna have a lot of activity at the front end, you're gonna stall, you're gonna bump it, you're gonna stall, you're gonna go public, you're gonna have big increase, you're gonna stall, you're gonna, an endowment one, you could spend 2-3 years just talking to donors and then get one. And then more time and then get one, right? So the cultivation time is much, much, much longer. But it's important that you keep those people engaged. The other part that's important because of the time horizon and because of the turnover in staffing in nonprofits is that you keep really good notes and that you make sure everyone in the organization or everyone who needs to know is engaged with what's going on so that you don't get them right to that point. Then there's a staff turnover and you lose them, right? You want to keep engaging them with the organization. Makes sense. And you need board approval. Your board may have been the impetus to say we need an endowment. And then okay, how do we forego our income today? And okay, give us time, we'll develop a plan. And sometimes a lot of times you're educating your board on what does this really mean. Launching an endowment campaign looks similar to the capital campaign. Develop your campaign pyramid. It may be 90-10, 90% of your gifts coming from the top. You can solicit those broad-based. Generally, this one might look a little more like a needle without that broad-based support, but certainly I would always invite your broader constituents to give. Because even if you don't get a lot of dollars, I think getting them involved and educating them about your organization, about endowments, about the importance. Who knows, somebody who gives $100 to your endowment today may end up giving you 10 million in 30 years. And all the research says that it's like, I think it's millennials who as a cohort are the most generous. They don't have a lot of money, right? So they're not giving huge gifts, but their percentages that they're giving is rivaling and even surpassing the boomers who have the wealth who are making the big gifts. So engage them, keep them engaged, because when they have the boomer income, they'll likely be major donors and they want to change the world and they're philanthropic. And with there's a multi-trillion-dollar transfer of wealth, right? They may be getting that wealth sooner than you think. So engage them in that. And that's also where you develop that relationship because you can help them manage that wealth. And I don't mean that sarcastically, I mean that in truthfully, right? And help them make a difference with it. And with you guys, we've had this conversation before. People who love animals seriously love animals. So I would think that, find the right donor and you could have a lot of success. And I don't think that's untrue for, cancer support or the arts. It's so super true in animal welfare.
Mm-hmm.
You hear the stories of, I left my estate to my cat.
Yeah.
You have to identify your prospective donors. It's, look in your database, who's given consistently over a 10-year period. Doesn't have to be large gifts. If it's consistent, they're a prospect. Look at who doesn't have heirs. They don't have children, makes them a prospect. Because if I have an estate, I don't have anybody to give it to, goes to somebody or the government. And probably most people would rather go to somebody or something. Follow like local business news. Look who's got a windfall. What businesses have been sold lately? What businesses have been acquired? Who's going public? Right? that some of those donors can, they may have some extra wealth that they might be willing to put into some kind of an endowment program. Who's nearing retirement. And then also it's just talking to your donors, especially your major donors. Have you ever thought about, we really appreciate all your support that you've given to the organization over the years. Have you thought about your legacy and how you'd like to be known? And, how you'd like to continue to support this organization forever. And they might go, yeah, I've been thinking about that. Or they might go, no, we're done, right? But opening that conversation is something that a lot of people don't do. So open that conversation. And last I looked at the data, it's like only 30% have an estate plan or even have a will. And so even opening that conversation about, have you planned what your estate is? Because everybody thinks they're going to be the first to, define mortality. No one's done it yet. So having them thinking about it that way is another way to open that conversation. But all of this is a way to identify your perspective. And like I said before, it's not companies or foundations. Maybe some private companies might, but it probably not. You need to learn the different plan giving vehicles. You don't have to be an expert in them, but you need to be conversational. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know, when you don't know. Don't be afraid to ask for advice. Because unless you are an attorney or a financial planner, you probably aren't deeply versed in this, and that's okay. But you need to be the one to start the conversation and to have the conversation of, and you should give it to us. But I look at it as a win if you open the conversation, even if they give some to other organizations, if we can raise the sector, I think that's a good thing too, but try and convince them to give it to you. I also recommend, if you're going to do this, recruit a plan giving advisory council. These are volunteers who work kind of like your campaign cabinet does for a capital campaign, but these are specifically for plan giving. Have an attorney or two, have a financial planner or two, have a trust officer or two. Somebody who can help you identify prospects, and they cannot ethically tell you, hey, old man Winters is loaded and just got diagnosed with a terminal disease, go talk to him, right? But when their clients come to them, they can point them toward different ideas. I think I asked somebody one time and they're like, we cannot advocate for your organization, but if they ask and say, hey, I'd really like a healthcare organization, or, I'm really passionate about cancer care, they could point you toward cancer support community, or, gee, I'd love to care for other dogs. I love that I've, had some strays, and they can point you toward your organization. So it doesn't hurt. The other thing it does is it brings some advisors close to you. So if you need to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need help, you've got some people who can help you. You need to be careful of where's that volunteer line and where's that professional line. If you're doing a really complicated vehicle, you probably want to hire an attorney to represent you, to review the documents, and because all of this is done by contract, or have someone reviewing the annuity agreement, make sure it's favorable to you, etc. And I would have your attorney on it. But that can be a really good way to get that expertise that you may or may not have. And to have it around you. Recruit volunteers. Are there people in your community who maybe don't have that expertise, but who have that network? Who can help extend the work of the development staff in reaching out and having these conversations? Once someone makes a gift to you, having them makes a commitment to you, having them talk about why is this important to them? Why did they do this? And going with you or talking to others about the project can be very useful. Because then it's not just you selling me, but it's someone who's done it, who's found value in it. Develop marketing materials. This is complicated, so sometimes having more complicated marketing materials can be useful as well. Questions on that stuff? All right. Implementing the campaign, solicit leadership and major donors. This one, you know, in the capital campaign, we work down the pyramid. This one, the pyramid's gonna not quite be as clear or as clean. You've heard of the millionaire next door. These are people who, you know, look like they don't have a whole lot of wealth, and all of a sudden they leave their $5 million estate somewhere. You know, frugality leads to wealth, probably more so than ostentatious display. So you don't know where you're going to find these. So sometimes it's casting a wide net. As you start to get hints, get clues, they tell you, oh, gee, I have a $5 million estate I have to do something with. You know, that may change your donor pyramid. And really that should say cultivate. Because as I said before, this cultivation process can be years, even decades. And it's something where, you know, the urgency isn't there until it is, right? It's because like I said, everybody's going to be the first to beat mortality, and they don't like to think about it. My dad got sick like 5 years ago, and you know that my sister manages their money, and so she was like, I think I need to have a conversation with dad about their estate. My dad would always be really quiet about that. And you know, so we talked it through. She approached him about it and was like, yes, how soon can you be here? And went, uh-oh, red flag. And it was, he was sick, he knew it, and he knew he had to get things in order, and he did. So it's, you don't always have someone there at the right moment capturing that, but it's got to be on their timeline. You're asking the questions, you're encouraging them. Part of it too is get the family involved, because you don't want the family going, wait a minute, they took advantage, and you know, and that's, you know, make sure they understand what's going on. They're with them as you're talking to them, if that's appropriate, as well. Because you're oftentimes working with older individuals whose faculties may have begun to slip. You also, the ethics here is very clear, and you've got to be very careful that there isn't even the appearance of taking advantage as well. Decide if you're going to do a broad-based campaign. Your broad-based campaign's not going to do much. I like to get your other donors involved, because just because someone doesn't have the ability to make a huge gift doesn't mean they don't want to feel like they're part of your organization forever. So I would say do a broad-based campaign at some point. Kind of the 65-75% rule is a whole lot less fluid here. Because the other thing is a lot of these gifts you won't know about. They may put you in their will and not tell you. And you may not know until you got a surprise.
We just got one of those. It was a very nice surprise.
Yes, they are very nice surprises. And some organizations will make the decision that when we get a bequest like that, it goes into our endowment, right? Because whatever that gift was, you know, all of a sudden 100,000 in your annual fund this year, you spend it and you expect you're gonna have it next year, well, you're not, right? So that's some organization made that decision. You want to look at FASB's rules of accounting. FASB is Financial Accounting Standards Board. And they, and when we were at Ambrose, we also looked at CASE, which was Council for the Advancement and Support of Education. But there are certain ways in which you count planned gifts towards your goal. So, and I'm not an accountant, and so I'll give you an example, but don't quote me on the specifics. So like the annuity that I mentioned earlier, $100 million annuity, it's paying the donor every year. At the end of the donor's life, you get what's left. There are ways to count that because it's not $1 million gift to you. You don't know what it's going to be to you. It could be 1.5, could be 750,000, right? And so there's formulas in how you count each of those. So you want to learn those so that when you're reporting on what you've raised through this endowment campaign, you are reporting it correctly. And there's two ways you're going to report it. One is the marketing number. Marketing number doesn't really matter. It does, there should be some semblance to reality. But when you're looking at your financial statements, then it's important that you understand this. So get your accountant, I guess is the short answer. You want to make sure you're acknowledging and recognizing your donors throughout. This is always important, but it's even more important in an endowment campaign if you're looking at planned gifts, because most of these gifts are revocable. And put you in my will today, and you ignore me for a year, and I take you out tomorrow. So finding some way of really recognizing the people who've made this long-term commitment to you so that you continue to keep them close to you is important. And as I said before, often people will create a heritage society or some special group and they'll do special events or something. And they don't have to tell you they took you out. They might tell you, yeah, I put you in my will for 5 million, first of all. They may or may not have, right? Not that most people are dishonest. And they could take you out in a year and never tell you. So you're expecting that money, but it's revocable, so you may or may not have. And celebrate your successes. It's especially when you get a large one. And with the donor's permission, if you can celebrate it publicly, that's awesome too. And a lot of the really large gifts that you hear public, a lot of them are planned gifts. They're estate gifts. They're not necessarily cash. Sometimes there's a combination of both. And you can do that too. You know, what about, you know, some of it now with the cash you have and some of it later in your estate, because they don't need that money, it's left over, right? Differences between an endowment campaign and a capital campaign. Types of donors. As I said before, you're not going to get foundation and corporate gifts. Even, you know, I mean, they're not planned gifts, but most of them won't give to your endowment. That's probably the number one difference. Your timeline for solicitation. As I said, an endowment gift, especially if it's a planned gift, can take decades for you to get the commitment and then decades for you to see the money. Not a reason not to do it, but that's why you need patience. At Ambrose, we used to joke that the way to assure a long life was to leave St. Ambrose in your estate. So it, you hate to wish ill, but you've got to plan for that, and that timeline can be very long. Even for making a decision. I mean, if somebody's going to make especially a really major transformational gift to you to your endowment, that's going to require that they do a lot of planning. Hopefully they're talking to their family, not something they're going to do on the spring. The size and types of gifts. Capital campaign, you need cash or something that you can make liquid quickly, like stocks. An endowment gift often is not. And endowment gifts can often be much larger because of that. Not always. I mean, they can also leave 10,000 to you in their estate. I mean, it doesn't have to be huge. Even if their estate is huge. Length of the campaign. I mean, you could build your endowment without an endowment campaign. And by that, I mean, if you remember when we started, a campaign is a marketing strategy under an umbrella where you're going, okay, in the next 5 years, we're going to add 10 million to our endowment. That's our goal. That's what we're working toward. We're going to focus all our resources there. And that's a good way to do it. It's a good way to focus resources, focus messaging, etc. But that doesn't mean when that's over, you stop asking for endowment campaign. For capital campaign, once your building's built or renovated, or you buy the HVAC, you don't keep asking for money for it. It's done, you've moved on. So really an endowment program / campaign should get woven into the infrastructure of your entire organization and should be always ongoing. Because you don't want to go, I know I talked to you about this 5 years ago. We're done with that campaign. I don't want to talk to you anymore about the 5 million. You want to leave us in your state, right? You're going to keep that going. And the timeline for organizational benefit. If you do even a 3-year campaign for capital is long. You might have your new building in 5 years. If you do a 3-year endowment campaign, you might not even see any more cash in your endowment or in your organization for 10, 15, 20 years. But you will, because you're building long-term success. If you can get a capital campaign done in a year, 18 months, maybe 2 years, that's a pretty good timeline.
How long is that?
A year is fast, but would be good. Probably 18 to 24 months for a capital campaign. Depends on your goal. Depends on your infrastructure. Depends how much planning you've done. But if it starts from, hey, let's do a capital campaign. And if you worked it all the way through, depending on your infrastructure and your goal, you could probably have it done in about 2 years. The endowment would be. That's what I have. Questions, comments, thoughts? Did I scare you?
Not scared. It's just a lot.
Yeah.
So much. And we have such an old organization, but I don't feel like the development has been done well for as old as our organization is.
Development meaning fundraising? Or just-
And donor relations and stewardship and.
In relationships with our city contract holders.
Yeah, as old as our organization is, you would think we would have an endowment by now. Like it's 121 years old.
1902.
Wow, I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah.
But have you always been private or were you a city ends?
I think we've always been
Always
private.
been private. Mhm. The only thing, I think we've talked about this a million times, just general branding.
Mhm.
The general public thinks that we are a government organization. I mean, we have people come in our lobby that, you know, we're mad at animal control and they talk about how they pay our salaries. And I'm like, you don't, because we're not tax funded necessarily. But
And if you know, just based on what you're saying, my recommendation, if you think you want to do a campaign, and it sounds like you do, and you probably need to.
yeah, right now it's words.
and-
Yeah.
But you know, you could even sit down and go, okay, so what do we need?
Mhm,
And from what you're saying, you need a marketing campaign,
mhm.
you need a branding campaign.
Yeah, and we've got a big piece with the city with what they pay us for the services we provide them,
Mhm.
and it's an issue. And that's gonna be part of a marketing campaign in
Mhm.
reality, because while the first part of a marketing campaign for that will be that we have to increase that funding and what the
Right.
city pays us to continue what we do,
Right.
or else we will be really private.
Yeah.
So that's kind of part of it, because that could lead into, I mean, one good general knowledge. I think like you mentioned, the community doesn't know you well enough, and that's
Mhm.
us. Like the
Yep.
community. We've seen a difference in the last 2 years since we've kind of been pushing what we do and making ourselves more transparent, but the general broad community here in the Quad Cities has no idea what we do, and they don't know that we're private. Even our own city funders and councilmen think that we
Yeah.
receive funding from, you
That
know,
was a fun
the
conversation.
Humane Society of the United States. I'm like, they're a private organization as well. Do you realize that? They don't fund, you know, no understanding of what we do or who we are, how we operate, that kind of thing.
And
This
so-
will help, this this marketing
Right.
campaign.
And some of it is everybody in the community doesn't have to know,
Mhm.
right? I mean, and you've got what you mentioned, two different audiences. Council needs to understand one thing,
Mhm.
and that's kind of irrelevant for the capital,
Mhm.
right? Although it'd be nice to get city dollars, but that's a whole different conversation.
Mhm.
And your donors / prospective donors, animal lovers,
Mhm.
basically, need to know something
Mhm.
else. And so I could almost see a two-tiered approach to marketing with similar but different messages about why what you do is important and why. Being the city, you need to tell them this is important and this is what it really costs and this is why you
Mhm.
need to pay it. The general public's a little bit different.
Mhm.
Does the city have another option? If you said,
No.
no, we won't take the contract,
No.
which gives you some power.
Yeah,
I feel
it
like we have a
does.
lot of leverage going into this.
Yeah, our timeline has decreased drastically because of that. And honestly, the more time we give them, the more time they do have to find another option, but
Yeah.
that doesn't really exist here
Yeah.
in the county.
Like they would
There-
have to build their own animal shelter. There's
Yeah.
nobody else they can lean on.
Yeah,
The only other animal welfare organization here in the state in Scott County is King's Harvest, and they've already kind of. Years ago, there was the contract negotiations with the Humane Society in the city, and it was in the news. And they've already kind of explored King's Harvest, and the city likes to use that, I think. Then as well, we have another option. They don't though. And unless they provide King's Harvest with, you know, a multi-million-dollar building, and then it's like. You
And
can't do
it-
that in 6 months.
And it
So
would realistically be the same boat that we're in, but like, we're currently holding their contract and we're proving that we
Yeah.
can, whereas King's
Yeah.
Harvest,
has never done it before.
yeah. And that would be a very complicated
Yeah,
event for them. Like at that point, they would be better off building their own animal control
yes.
facility.
Yeah, and we're different, very different organizations. King's Harvest does not have, like, while what their staff do is very important, their staff do not have the same skill sets as our staff. We have staff that are well-versed in like herd medicine. We are taking in hundreds of animals a month. They are not.
Hmm.
They are planning for what comes into their building.
Yeah.
They have control over that, like we don't.
Yeah.
And we have staff that are well-versed in how these things work and how the money works to make it last
Yeah.
for this many animals. Whereas their staff, like if they have a major medical thing, it's like they've got to ask for the money right then. We
Yeah.
have plans and we know how we're going to handle those things. It's just very different skill sets.
We also have staff that are well versed in handling dangerous animals that we are required to take in
Yes.
because of the city.
That's another thing. I mean,
Wow.
we've
Yeah.
been asked for help from King's Harvest for handling animals that they can't handle because they get them in and they don't realize that, you know, whatever shelter in the South they got them from didn't tell them all the truth about that animal's behavior. They're not used to, I mean, we handle dogs that have mauled people, killed other animals. They don't deal with that kind of stuff. And I'm glad
Yeah.
they don't have to. It's
Yeah.
not a fun thing
Yeah,
to do,
I'm
No.
but
sure.
it's a skill set for sure that,
And your staff have to be very
Mhm.
well trained.
and the cost of it. I worked for King's Harvest for a little while and I have a very good relationship with Terry. There's a very big difference in paying, you know, a couple of animal care staff and they learn how to do basic medical, like we're intaking things that are going in for like major surgeries that second because they can't live if they don't get it. You know, those kind of like, there's a big difference in what we do.
And so, I mean, in your messaging, you never disparage another
No.
organization, but there are ways to make that message
Yes.
known
Yeah.
without naming names.
Yeah.
and-
Yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think King's Harvest has also made it very clear they don't want the contract.
Yeah, they have now. They.
And I don't blame them, like.
No, and well, because one, it's not enough. It is,
Mhm.
no organization can look at what they pay us for our services and say that it's enough. We've done like very beginning research into the other 5 most populated cities in the state, and we are severely underpaid for our services compared to ones that take in thousands of less animals or have thousands of less people in their population.
Wow, well, hopefully the city will listen to that.
Yeah,
I hope so.
we're gonna work on it.
Yeah, yeah. But, you know, and on a capital campaign, I would say, don't let it scare you. It's a lot of work. I'm not
Mhm,
gonna sugarcoat that. But it really, I mean, if you're raising money, it's the same kind of thing. It's
Mhm.
just, as I say, it's on steroids.
Yeah,
It's just bigger. It's like, you know, taking in chihuahuas or taking in huskies,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing.
Different level.
yeah.
I get a little bit more excited when we get huskies.
It's a little more work.
And there are people who get more excited when they could do a capital campaign, same kind of thing, but. You know, I mean, at their base, it's identification, it's education, cultivation,
Mhm,
solicitation, stewardship. You're just doing a whole lot more of it and you're
Mhm.
asking for bigger dollars.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But you have something, I'm gonna say, more exciting
yes,
to sell.
yeah.
Not that your everyday stuff isn't exciting,
Mhm.
but wow, I get to be part of that new facility. We didn't even
Yes.
talk about naming opportunity,
Right.
right? That can be a strategy too.
Yep.
is,
Yeah,
You know, I don't have to endow a cage, but we can
Mhm.
have the Waston cage, right?
Yes,
And,
yeah.
and even as part of the capital campaign, and that can be exciting for donors too.
Yeah.
And I find when organizations do a campaign like this, that they're, especially their donors they have, want to be part of it.
Mhm.
They're excited to be
Yeah.
asked.
Yes.
And I would think that would be really true for your
Mhm.
donors.
I
I think
so.
for this community, for sure, I think while we're working against the general community perception that the Humane Society is not always great, and we're working against a poor public image from the past. And that definitely has improved, and we now have like the data to back that up for the ones that like don't see it yet or don't believe it yet. But I think that we have a lot of prospects in the community that even if they're not huge donors yet or supporters, we can get them there quickly because of what we stand for. And they already, you know, they already care so much about animal welfare that we just need to show them that we're good at it
Mhm.
so that they'd support us. They don't have to have this like 25-year-long relationship with our organization necessarily, because they have a relationship with the cause already.
Exactly.
And we see how much people care about animals after the building collapse.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yep.
Also,
You got good press on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know that's
did.
not why you did it, but
No.
you did get good press on that. Certainly doesn't hurt.
Mhm.
And you're also in the unenviable position of oftentimes your interaction as a citizen with the Humane Society is not always because of a positive situation,
Mhm.
right? It's one thing to be going in there to go adopt a
Right.
cute,
Mhm.
cuddly, whatever. But I'm sure oftentimes it's my dog got away,
Mhm.
my dog bit someone.
Mhm.
you know,
Those are the hard ones.
Yes.
and that's not a pleasant interaction
Yeah.
and not your fault.
Yeah, we try to
But it's,
flip the script on that now. Our staff are getting much better at we have to get away with that old school mindset of like, if somebody returns an animal, like, I think our staff are much better now than they were 2 years ago. I'm like, why does it matter, guys? It's just like a foster. They
Yeah.
return animals every day and we praise them. Like,
Yeah.
if somebody adopts and they return, don't shun them. Somebody needs to bring their animal to us. That's why we exist, is to help them, and there's a big difference. I think that QC Paws and Rock Island is a great example too of how if you can separate the animal control portion, because that is the negative side of it.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
going to be, they enforce things, so it's no different than the
Yeah.
police.
yep,
You have so many supporters and then you have the people that, you only see the negative. If your community only sees the negative, they're not gonna like you.
Yeah.
But QC Paws has done a good job. There are so many people that don't realize that is the same shelter.
Hmm.
Rock Island Animal Control is QC Paws. And so, people are like, I've seen comments, well, don't take it to Rock Island Animal Shelter. That's the city shelter. And you need to take it to QC Paws. And I'm like, it's the same building, guys. It's the same thing, but I think differentiating the two as well helps a lot.
I didn't realize before I started here.
Yeah,
I volunteered at their shelter and I didn't even know.
yeah.
I always thought it was just QC Paws. Like their building
Mhm.
says Rock
We need a-
Island, but
We need a different name. Our name associates us with the government, which we're not. We're paid for a service. We're not funded by them.
Yeah.
And then it associates us with, I think, animal control, because you hear the county part and you go, oh, well, they have animal control.
Yeah.
I
And
love
you
the
do.
QC Pet Project, like
Yeah.
a different
Yeah.
name would make a huge difference.
Yeah. Except that the Scott County Humane Society is so well known.
Yes, I think
Mhm.
right now
Amazing.
it's important to keep,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think rebranding is definitely something that can be thought about. Future plans, it could be
Yeah.
5-10 years, but
Is QC Paws the one out by the airport?
yes.
Okay, that's where we got one of our dogs.
That's where we got one of my dogs and our cat.
And funny story, because we had adopted, there's a beagle who we just lost, but he, friend brought him to us and we adopted him and he was too young for my son and we ended up giving it back to her and said, would you adopt him out? And so he did, she did. And then we had a call from QC Paws / Rock Island Humane Society, we got your dog. Well, we don't have a dog, we've got the microchip.
Mm,
That
And the new
happens.
owners didn't change
Change it
the
over.
microchip,
Yeah.
so they called us. And so we're like, okay, somebody's speaking to us,
Mhm.
right? And they're like, 7 days, or he goes back on the adoption floor, doesn't get adopted. He's gone, right?
Mhm.
So we're like, okay, what do we do? We ended up readopting him. And they ended up, which is why I thought it was the same one. I guess if he was a runaway, there would have been a fine or a something, they waived some of that stuff.
Because it wasn't
and-
really a runaway from you.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
He adopted us.
That's definitely a meant to be kind of story
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Like he found his way back to you.
Yeah.
He did in a very serendipitous way. And
Mhm.
that, and I think, I don't know how he ended up even at Rock Island. I'm not quite sure where she adopted him out, but I think it was way out.
Yeah.
So
Weird.
I'm not sure
Hmm.
how he found his way back there. but-
Maybe somebody rehomed him to rehome him somewhere else. It happens.
Yeah,
There-
yeah.
There have been times where we get animals in and we're like, oh, so that's the previous owner. And they're like, nope, I'm not the previous owner. This, and we're like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
A
It's
lot of
like,
connecting of dots.
it really is sometimes. Microchips are always fun to trace. We just had one the other night. First person claims they have no idea what we're talking about. They don't have a dog. Second person's phone number is disconnected. And then another family shows